Trigger is a new electric stun character coming out in 1.6. However, unlike what you'd normally expect from a stun character, most of her stunning is actually just off-field. Starting off with her basic attack, it's your generic basic attack. Nothing really interesting to talk about there, but more interestingly, when you hold her basic attack, she will enter her sniping stance, where she will continuously snipe enemies. I'm pretty sure this doesn't have a cooldown. I think you can just infinitely snipe enemies for as long as you want, even though you wouldn't optimally do that, but it is cool that it's something you can do. After you let go of the basic attack button, she will launch a finishing blow and then exit her sniping stance. The stun motion value for this crouching stance isn't really that high. Typically, you'd only want to do 3 shots and then the final blow, which only equates to 337 stun motion value. If we compare this to King Yi's motion value from her enhanced basic, she does 734 stun motion value on top of giving herself a 32.5% increase to the days done from these basic attacks. So King Yi kind of clears her in that aspect, but it's to be expected. Trigger is more of an off-field character anyways. When she shoots enemies in the sniping stance, she will gain sniper points, and after she does that finishing blow at the end of her stance, she will apply a buffed effect to the entire team, which lasts for 50 seconds. However, this duration cannot be refreshed if you do your final blow again. You have to wait for the 50 seconds to end to refresh this duration, but it is a pretty long cooldown, so you won't really have a problem with keeping it up. Now, what these sniping points do and what this enhanced effect that she applies to the team does, we'll kind of get to later on in the kit. Her EX special has your typical 60 energy cost that you'll see in pretty much every stunner. It has a 913 stun motion value, which is actually pretty good. If we compare this to Coleda's EX special, it has a 970 stun motion value, so it's not that much worse than Coleda's, and Coleda is one of the highest burst stunners in the game. Now, you do have to take into account that Coleda's core passive gives her a fuck ton more stun for her EX special, so Coleda will just completely clear this ability, but the multiplier on it is pretty good. Her chain attack and ultimate are your generic damage dealing abilities. They don't do anything special. Scalings on them are also pretty normal. Stun motion value on a chain attack doesn't matter because, well, if you're chain attacking, that means the enemy's stunned, is what I would have said if Astral didn't exist. Because of Astral, you can actually chain attack outside of the stun window, so it low-key matters if you're playing Astra. Now, the motion value for this stun is actually kind of fucking mid. It's a 204 stun motion value, which is pretty fucking low. Compare this to King Yi, she has a 313 stun motion value, which also really isn't that high. I'm not sure why both their chain attacks have such low stun multipliers. It's probably because they didn't think you would normally use this on a non-stunned enemy. If we look at the ultimate, Trigger's motion value on her stun is 1,845, while King Yi's is 1,646. Her ultimate actually does pretty good stun damage, and even though her chain attack doesn't really do that much, it really doesn't matter unless you're playing Astral, and even then, not that big of a deal. Then finally, this is where we start getting into the off-field part of her kit. I've been mentioning how she was off-field, but nothing really sounded off-fieldy yet. This is where that changes. Trigger has an ability called an additional attack, and the way this works is it's kind of like a follow-up attack in HSR, where the character doing this attack does not need to be on field to do it. In HSR, for example, it doesn't need to be that character's turn for them to do a follow-up. Trigger doesn't need to be on the field to do this additional attack. The actual indicator for an additional attack would be a text pop-up appearing on your screen saying fire, and then the character would do their additional attack. In Trigger's case, it would be her doing 3 snipes, but for each character, it can look different. Now, the motion value on this is actually fucking terrible. Crazy, I know. So at the time of recording this, they actually decided to hotfix this ability. They buffed the scaling of the days on this additional attack by pretty much triple. So not only am I re-recording this part, but for pretty much the rest of this video, I had to re-record and recalc a lot of shit because most of what I was saying was going off the fact that this multiplier was dog shit. Now it's a lot better. So yeah, thanks a lot, Hoyo, for making this video 10 times harder to release. So how exactly does this core passive work? Well, it might be one of the biggest pieces of yap I've seen in a kit in a while, but to kind of dumb it down, remember that buff effect I mentioned earlier in her sniping stance? Yeah, the way that works is it will increase the days of her additional attacks by 20%, and when an ally attacks an enemy, their stun damage multiplier will increase by 20%. So there's actually been some clarification on the way that her stun damage multiplier works. It's actually a 30% stun damage multiplier increase instead of the 20%, and outside of the stun window, she gives a 20% damage taken increase debuff to the enemy's hit. So this is actually really good. You have a permanent 20% damage taken increase, which is a really good source of damage because it's calculated after almost every other type of buff in the game. The only thing that's actually better than this is the stun damage multiplier increase that she already gives. So unlike most stunners that can only buff during the stun window, Trigger can just buff during the entire fight. So yeah, that's super good. Now, how does she use these additional attacks? Well, she needs these things called sniper and call points. She can have up to 3 sniper points. She would get get one from each sniper stance shot. It's why I said you only wanted to do 3 shots in your sniper stance, because, well, you can only have 3 sniper points, so you might as well only do 3 sniper shots. Meanwhile, her call points are gained from attacks hitting enemies after she enters her buff state from doing her final sniping stance shot. Unlike sniper points, there is no limit to these call points. You can technically have an unlimited amount, but every time you do an additional attack, you will consume these call points. So technically you won't have an unlimited amount, but yeah, you get the idea. To get into the specifics, the way this works exactly is each sniper point will reduce the amount of call points needed to do your additional attack. For example, if you have 0 sniper points, you would need 19 call points to do an additional attack, which means you would need to do 19 hits while trigger is in this buff state. You can also only gain 1 call point per second, so this basically means you would only be able to do an additional attack once every 19 seconds. That's a long fucking time. However, when you get more sniper points, if you have the max 3, it would instead be 10 call points per additional attack, which reduces it by 9 seconds. That's pretty nice. And an additional part of this that will help you do your additional attacks even more. I hate the word additional attacks. I'm saying additional so many times, I wish I could just call them follow-up attacks. Additionally, after you do an additional attack, the amount of call points needed will be reduced by 2 with a maximum decrease of 6. So for example, after your first additional attack with 3 sniper points, you would go from 10 call points needed to 8 call points needed. And then after your second additional attack, you would go from 8 call points needed to 6 call points needed. And after your third, you would go from 6 call points needed to 4 call points needed. And that would be the amount you would need for all of your future additional attacks. This basically means that once you get 3 additional attacks, you will be able to get another additional attack every 4 seconds for the rest of Trigger's buff state that she applies to the team. Another cool thing is her EX special will actually make the next additional attack not need to consume any call points. So when you EX special and swap off of her, you will just instantly do an additional attack. Add this onto the fact that her EX special already does a good amount of days, and this will be an ability that you'll want to use pretty much off cooldown every time you have it. Don't ignore her EX special, it's pretty damn good. Finally, all call points / sniper points and the stun multiplier buff you get from this enhanced state will be removed after the 50-second buff is over. You have to rebuild up your sniper points and you have to rebuild up the call points. And then finally, her additional ability is triggered when there is an attack character or a same faction character. Now the fact that this is same faction kind of breaks her, because I mean there's no fucking obal squad characters besides Anby and Soldier 11. I don't know about y'all, Soldier 11 fucking sucks. This kind of means that she either has to play Anby or she has to play with attack characters that can make use of Trigger's low field time requirements by having high field time requirements themselves. The only attack characters that this applies to that don't suck complete ass are Ellen and Evelyn, and I'll kind of get to how well she can synergize with them over Lyacon or lighter later on in the video. But yeah, what this ability does is during her buff effect state, whatever the fuck it's called, her crit rate will increase by 10%, and for every 1% of crit rate past 40%, capping at 65% crit rate, will give her 1% days increase to her additional attack at a maximum of 25% days increase. So at 65% crit rate, you will have a 25% days increase on your additional attacks. It's a nice little bonus, nothing outstanding though, and despite the fact that there are no crit rate W engines for stunners besides her signature, this 65% crit rate cutoff isn't hard to reach, so you'll pretty much get this as long as your build isn't dog shit. What her signature W engine does is, well, first of all, it's a crit main stat. It gives her 24% crit rate, and then what the passive does is when the wearer does an additional attack that also deals electric damage, the target's defense is reduced by 20% for 5 seconds. Defense reduction on the W engine is pretty fucking nice. Sadly, again, only she can use it. She's the only electric character that does additional attacks and is a stunner, so if you do end up pulling this signature engine, you gotta keep in mind that this will only be good on her. Additionally, when this effect is triggered, if the character is off field, they will gain 1 layer of energy. We'll just call it that. I don't know if that's the actual word. Stacking up 8 times. You get 1 layer per off-field attack. When using your EX special, all layers are consumed, decreasing impact and damage dealt by 3% for 8 seconds with a max of 24% increase. Normally I'd glaze this weapon a bit more, but because it's pretty easy to get the max crit rate needed to increase your days from her additional ability, not having the crit rate on this W engine doesn't feel as bad compared to using a W engine with no crit rate. On top of this, her damage isn't very good. It's like okay, so wanting crit rate just for offensive stats doesn't really matter either. You're also not stacking up the defense shred from this W engine. This will usually be the only source of defense shred in your team. So on paper, this weapon is pretty good, but it doesn't actually change that much compared to the other options. So I talked about her kit. How good is she actually? Well, if we compare the total stun motion value from Trigger and King Yi in an 18-second rotation, Trigger's total stun motion value, assuming you get 4 additional attacks and 2 EX specials and the parry, because, well, Trigger's off field, so you can actually parry on her. So you'd have 3,625 424 total stun motion value, while King Yi's ends up being 4051. So in terms of total days motion value, King Yi is just roughly 11% better than Trigger, but because Trigger is doing all the stunning off field, your on-field character can contribute to the stunning a bit more compared to King Yi, who can deal with stunning completely on her own. So the difference won't end up being as big as you might think, depending on who the on-field character actually is. This, however, makes Trigger's synergy with burst characters like Harumasa and Julian pretty bad because they don't do a lot outside of the stun window, and they don't really contribute to days build up either. So even though her stunning isn't the greatest, she's not as good as King Yi would be, she still has some pretty good synergies with other attack characters because of the way her kit works. For example, if we look at Ellen, normally she'd be used with Lighter or Lyacon, but Trigger ends up being a pretty good option compared to Lyacon and Lighter. Lighter gives 15% ice res down, roughly 40 to 50% damage bonus depending on what W engine you have, but if you're using a free-to-play one, it's like 40% damage bonus plus the 3-second stun window increase, while Trigger would just give a permanent 20% damage taken increase, which is effectively just better than the 15% res pen Lighter gives, and it turns into a 30% stun damage multiplier increase during the stun window, which is just better than the 40 to 50% damage bonus he gives. And then Lycon's kind of the same thing. This is all while Trigger is using practically zero field time, so your Ellen is able to attack more outside of the stun window, but this doesn't mean that you need to pull Trigger for them specifically. Lighter and Lycon still technically give bigger buffs than Trigger would for Ellen and Evelyn, because both of their buffs stack. Lighter's res pen will stack with his damage bonus, and Lycon's res pen will stack with his stun damage multiplier, while Trigger is either only giving a 20% damage increase or the 30% stun damage multiplier when an enemy is stunned. So during the stun window specifically, when you get Lighter and Lycon's buffs to their full extent, they will give more damage than Trigger would, but because of the fact that Trigger is giving you damage outside of just the stun window, the damage she gives compared to Lighter and Lycon ends up being a lot closer than you might think. Trigger's biggest advantage she gives over Lighter and Lycon is the fact that your attack character can just attack more often because the stunning character is doing their stunning off field. This applies to Ellen, this applies to Evelyn, and this will apply to any future character that really wants field time. So Lighter and Lycon will still get the job done perfectly fine. It is just important to note that she has this synergy with these two characters, and she will have this synergy with future characters as well. And then I haven't even mentioned Silver Soldier Anby, that she will just be the best character with. Anby synergizes very well with Trigger, specifically because she is a very field time heavy character that also does good stun and buffs the stunning of your off-field teammates. So Trigger will not only be good with Evelyn and Ellen, two pretty good DPSs, she'll also be very good with the new Anby, that will also be a very good DPS, and then in the future we might get even more DPSs that will be good with her. So this character not only has a lot of potential in the future, they will be good the second they release, but they're not also broken to where they just replace every other stunner in the game. King Yi will still be very good in her teams, and Trigger cannot touch her. Playing Trigger with Harumasa or Julian will feel like complete shit because those characters don't do much outside of a stun window, and Trigger alone will take very long to stun without a character that can also help with it. And if you're an anomaly player, you don't even have to give a fuck about stunners because anomaly teams don't even use one. I've also seen people mention how she's a damage dealing stunner. No, she's not. She doesn't deal any more damage than your typical stunner would. She is just a stunner who does the stunning off field. If we were to compare her damage multipliers to King Yi's multipliers, they're pretty goddamn similar. If we look at the motion value on her crouching sniper stance, where she does her 3 shots and then the 4th final shot, it's 708 motion value versus King Yi's 2060 motion value from her enhanced basic string. So King Yi just does a lot more fucking damage off the basics alone. If we then look at her EX special damage, it's 1452 motion value compared to King Yi's 1206. It's better than King Yi's, but not by that much. If we then look at the parry counter, it's 863 motion value, while King Yi's is 753. Again, better by not much. If we then look at the chain attacks, it's 1150 motion value compared to King Yi's 1295 motion value, which is just not better. And then the only impressive scaling is her ultimate that has a 4216 motion value compared to King Yi's 3341, which is actually pretty good. That's a good multiplier, but it's only on her ultimate, which you're not doing super often. And then if we look at her additional attack, which you would think would have a good multiplier, it only has a 182 motion value, which is really fucking low for an ability that's not even hitting that often. In an 18-second rotation, you're only getting 4 of these. It takes really long to get these. So for the damage to be so low when you're getting them not that frequently, it's kind of fucking shit. So in terms of actual damage, she's nothing crazy for a support. Her scalings are pretty similar to King Yi, and no one's going, oh, King Yi is the best fucking DPS support in the world. Like, no. My feelings on this character have actually changed a lot throughout the making making of this video because a lot of stuff has changed with their kit in this one version of their beta. And I'm saying this before V2 happens. This video will probably be released during V2. That might change shit even more. But yeah, I used to think this character was actually the worst stunner in the game before all the changes with her kit ended up happening. But now I'd say she's on the level with the best stunners in the game, and she might even be potentially better in the future. We'll have to see. Congrats, Trigger. You passed the better than Coleta check. That's my goat.